On this episode, we visit Las Cruces, New Mexico. We talk with a former city councilor about development and pedestrians. Then we learn about health impact assessments. A report studied access to trails and parks in Doña Ana County. Finally, we look at the needs of poor and homeless pedestrians. Stay tuned.
We're in Las Cruces, New Mexico, talking with Sharon Thomas, who's a former city councilor. What issues dealing with pedestrians did you deal with on the city council?
We dealt mostly with the way the streets are designed, especially in the newer parts of the city where the streets got wider and the sidewalks got narrower and the parkways with trees between the sidewalk and the street disappeared. And so when I was on the council, one of our main goals was to try to redo our comprehensive plan so that we could have better design for streets and sidewalks.
And did you hear from your constituents about that sort of issue? What were people clamoring for?
Yes, very much so. My district was the district where a lot of new people live, especially retirees from other parts of the country, where they're used to having sidewalks they actually can use, and bike lanes and parks and trails that connect parks and those sorts of things. And so, yes, those people were all clamoring pretty much for better design.
Now, what are the different roles of the city and what the city council can do, and the developers who actually build a lot of this stuff? How does that all work together?
The city has a comprehensive plan, which is common all over the country, and out of that, then the council and the staff work together to develop the ordinances that determine, how wide the streets have to be, where the sidewalks have to go, all those sorts of things, and the developers have to meet those requirements. There was a period of time in Las Cruces where the developers pretty much controlled the city council, and so those are the years when the sidewalks got smaller and the streets got wider. The current comprehensive plan actually has some language about trails and connectivity and those kinds of issues, but they was never put into ordinances. They're now working on a new plan for the city. The comprehensive plans get redone about every 20 years, and we're in the midst of public meetings now, and so there's much more pressure to make the city more pedestrian and bicycle friendly.
And they're going to be having an open house on the new plan tomorrow afternoon. What sort of things are, when citizens come and look and see what's in the proposed plan, what sort of things are they going to see that are going to be better for pedestrians?
Well, I think one thing is to make the lanes more narrow. That helps to slow down traffic. There's quite a large group of bicycle people here in the community who have started a push to make this a more bicycle-friendly community. We're just bronze level now. They want to get up to silver. They've got several committees, including an engineering team, working on it. So they're having a big impact on Plan for Las Cruces, and they actually have the designs and the engineering back up. And so I think that's going to have and result in some pretty significant changes.
So, have you had developers over the years? I know we go look at some of the old developments in the city. They have, the sidewalk set back with the tree panel. Do you have modern developers that understand what it takes to make a walkable city?
We've had a couple, and there are some places, even in the newer part of the city, where you can see that kind of planning with the trees and shaded sidewalks. As I said, there was a period, though, when the development community that wanted fewer of those amenities and more room to build more houses on less land kind of had control. And so those are some of the ordinances that are in place that we're trying to change.
So you get the new plan in place, you get new ordinances in place, or are things looking good for pedestrians in the future, do you think?
I think so. We've had probably 8, 10 different plans. We now do blueprints. A neighborhood can come together and ask the city to work with them on a blueprint to make their neighborhood more the way they want their neighborhood to be. We have several of those going on. We currently have almost everybody on the city council moving in that direction. It depends on who's on the city council. So we have a lot of groups here that work on campaigns. They mostly come out of the Progressive Voters Alliance that has monthly meetings where these kinds of things get discussed. So the education and outreach has been pretty significant over the last 10 years. And I think there's a real change in the narrative about how we want this city to look.
We're talking with Michelle Del Rio, who's with the University of Texas El Paso, Center for Environmental Resource Management. What is the center?
The center is kind of like the environmental department at the university, and we focus in numerous topics and projects. We focus on water quality, resource renewable energies, and then my component is the health impact assessment. And through that project, we focus on plans or projects or policies that impact the community's health, and we evaluate those proposals before they're implemented, providing recommendations to how to reduce adverse health effects from those projects.
And is the health impact assessment something new? How'd that all get started?
It is kind of a relatively new process or type of studies. It actually started back in like 1990s, and it has slowly gotten momentum, and really it deviated from environmental impact assessments, or it developed from that. And so initially environmental impact assessments were supposed to evaluate both environmental and human impacts from a project, but essentially did not really, it kind of just concentrated into the environmental topics. And so the health impact assessments was developed in order to really focus on human health and human impacts. And it has slowly grown, and there's been numerous topics that's been studied. It can go from public transportation, from work, occupational topics, and so forth. And it's slowly growing, and it's slowly really being recognized as a very useful tool to combine both planning and health and really improve quality of life of communities.
Have people found it useful to have the separate health impact assessment and not try to just incorporate that into the environmental impact that they're doing anyway?
Well, it kind of, it is very useful to have it separate, because now you're focusing on human health and the human impact. And while you're still not just incorporating environmental impacts, but now you're incorporating also social, economic, and these are the topics that contribute to having a sustainable, healthy community. So it's not just environmental.
And then you worked on a project here in Las Cruces. What was that project?
Yes, so we worked on a project here in 2000, which started in 2014, and it was in collaboration with New Mexico State here in Las Cruces, and also a partnership with the World Health Organization, Pan American Health Organization. And we got funded by the Pew Charitable Trust and the Robert Wood Johnson Collaborating Funding Human Impact Project. And this was about assessing the proposal from the South Central Regional Transit Board District of whether or not to introduce bus transit services to the rural communities south of Doña Ana community, or Doña Ana County. And those are communities between El Paso, Texas, and Las Cruces. And so we assessed both what would be the direct and indirect health impacts from this proposal, and then also formulated recommendations again to SERTD to reduce adverse health impacts if we found any of this project. But most importantly, HIAs, and also in this project, we do a lot of community engagement, and that's essentially getting that information directly from the community members and giving them the voice and empowering them to be part of the planning of the community. And so this information helped the South Central Regional Transit Board District to better plan their services and see whether or not was it something that was needed by the community members, and how would it be utilized?
What sort of tools do you use when you're trying to access a community like that and find out what are their needs, what are their concerns? How do you get started?
Well, we do depend a lot in having good communication and identifying those key leaders of the community members. One thing that we have at our advantage is that we're from the region. We speak English and Spanish, so most of our communities are bilingual. And we really just, tell them from the very beginning just what really we want from their engagement and how they can provide their information, how this information is being used. So it's really like being transparent from the very beginning and being transparent with them through the whole process, but engaging them through the whole process and, not just taking the information and never come back. This information is given back to them so that they can also use it to their ways or to how to improve their community. And so we rely on expertise from other HIA practitioners nationwide. Also from our experience from the center, they have also done other HIA along the U.S.-Mexico border communities. And again, once we identify those key leaders or community leaders, then they kind of also lead us to their community. So that's kind of like the process. Part of our project, what we did was individual community surveys throughout these 21 rural communities or small communities. And then we also did key informant interviews with professionals in economic, education, and health sectors. And so it's just a really overall combination of skills, analytical methods, data, and engagement, community engagement, stakeholder engagement.
What were some of the key findings in your health impact and impact study for this community?
Yes, so in summary, the main impacts we found from this study is that users, or at least community members, would benefit from having access to many services. And what top services would be healthcare services, especially by seniors, access to food. There's essentially like a food desert out there. Access to other not so direct healthcare services, but other social services. Also, we saw that in the young population, they were mostly interested in having access to both formal and informal education opportunities, such as college, community colleges, workforce training, and also employment opportunities. And then there was some other impacts that we saw that having a bus system or a mass transit system would help reduce emissions in the environment or dust created by vehicles. Also would reduce any accidents, or we would improve road safety from reducing accidents that are connected to vehicles that are substandard conditions. So most of these communities, their families are of low income and are dependent in only one vehicle per household, which is a family of 5 or more. And so these vehicles are not in top conditions to run and puts them at risk to have an accident or not getting to the final destination or needed service. And then we also saw that that at least 90% of the respondents from our community survey, which we interviewed 1,054 community members, that they would use the bus transit to access either one of those services, related to health, education, or economic opportunities.
So now you finished the project. What happens to your final report? What's the next step?
So when we completed our project, like I said, we formulated recommendations back to the South Central Regional Transit Board District of our findings, and also to other decision makers or planning here at the city and the county regarding the transit system. And so we recommended that because of these substantial benefits to the community, that there was a need for such transit, and it would be recommended that they proceed with providing services. Currently, there is none alternative transportation system for members in those communities. So if their vehicle breaks down or they can't find someone who could bring them to those services, then they're out there stranded. And so we also recommended SCRTD to find funding for such to provide services, encourage ridership or using of the transit services, educate on riding the bus system. Many of these community members have never seen a bus or never ridden a bus, so even the process of getting on the bus is something that they need to overcome. And so these are some of the recommendations we provided back to SCRTD, but both to the Doña Ana County commissioners and other planning transportation organizations or agencies. Yeah.
We're talking with Richard Wright. Who do you work for?
St. Luke's Healthcare Clinic.
What do you do for him?
I'm a program manager for a behavioral health program.
And what does that involve?
Involves housing people who are experiencing chronic homelessness, severe mental illness, or substance use disorders.
And what did you do before you started working there?
So before that, I was working as an independent contractor with the Doña Ana Communities United as a health impact assessment mapping specialist.
And what did you map?
We mapped walkability throughout Doña Ana County, particularly in communities outside of Las Cruces. So we discovered that approximately 50% of residents within the county didn't have access to parks or other recreational facilities.
What was your criteria for what constituted access to recreation facilities?
So it's people living within a quarter mile of either a park or a recreational facility.
We're standing right next to a property of EBID, no trespassing sign. What is EBID and what would that have to do with your study?
Okay, so EBID is the Elephant Butte Irrigation District, and they manage canals and waterways throughout the community, throughout the county. And a lot of these could be easily converted into public walking spaces. People tend to trespass anyway and use it to cross through neighborhoods on a daily basis. These could be easily renovated and managed.
All these trails along the EBID right-of-ways, assuming they're nice and actually give people permission to use them legally, what impact can that have on the larger system?
Okay. So we have a lot of communities that are disconnected throughout the county, actually. And so increasing community connectivity would go a long way in terms of, you build parks and trails and public spaces for people to access. It helps with social cohesion. It helps with access to employment and other things.
Other than, the trail to walk on, what do people need to have a good experience out there?
Access to restroom facilities, parking spaces, shade structures, could be trees. More green space is always needed in Doña Ana County. Those kinds of things, water fountains would all go a long way. And creating a safe public space for people would increase the impact of these types of facilities.
And report was finished. Who's the report for? Who does it go to? What's the next step?
So the report was part of a guiding document for the county to use, and city officials too, for that matter. EBID could take a look at it if they wanted. It was part of the county's comprehensive plan to develop the community and communities within the county over the next 40 years or so.
We're talking with Carrie Bachman with Doña Ana Communities United. What is Communities United?
Well, Doña Ana Communities United is an organization that works to advance health equity in our county, located here in the southern part of the state. We do this in a variety of ways by linking community members whose voices are normally not heard with policymakers so that better decisions can be made that actually impact health in positive ways. And of course, the built environment is a huge part of that. So the health impact assessment that we conducted 2 years ago, we've now begun a project over the last year called Social Equity Mapping, where we work with community members to explore the community and to then share their ideas and observations with policymakers related to how our built environment can be healthier. So currently we're working with formerly homeless individuals as well as some young people who have had some scrapes with the law. And what we've really seen is these are voices that are not normally heard. And the issues that come out related to pedestrian safety, connectivity, are things that we don't often hear if we're just talking to folks who bike for because they can choose to do it. These are folks many times who don't have the option of using a vehicle and may not have enough money to even use a bus. And so by working with these community members, we're really we're starting to get a real full picture of what our community can be to be healthiest for everybody.
When you go and talk to some of these people who, perhaps have never done public input before, do pedestrian concerns show up quickly when you ask them, what are you concerned about, beyond, where your lunch comes from tomorrow?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, particularly with folks who use our Campus of Hope or Community of Hope campus here, most of them get here on foot or taking the bus and then having to walk into the campus. And it's not an easy route, especially if, for example, you're picking up your food bank boxes and you're trying to get home. How are you supposed to carry those boxes along a road where there's not a decent sidewalk where you could push a wheelchair if you're with somebody in a wheelchair, or push your baby stroller, or be in a group and actually feel safe? There are a lot of concerns related to pedestrian safety and connectivity as well, like where are the bus stops located? How often do the buses run? These are issues that come up because they're issues that relate to jobs, that relate to education, that relate to people being able to connect with each other. They're very important issues. We have multiple deaths each year here related to homeless folks who are hit by cars. So it's at the top of people's minds. It may not be at the top of my mind, being that I'm in a car all the time, but it is at the top of folks' minds who are out on the streets walking.
And you talk to them, you get their concerns. How does that then make its way to the folks that own the roads, that run the roads, that can actually do something?
Well, it's a really good question, and this is one of our challenges with public engagement generally in our society, but I would say particularly here in the city of Las Cruces and in the county. Normally folks will come to a public input period, 3 minutes to say your piece at a meeting. That to me is not a great way of engaging with the public. What that encourages is people who are comfortable in that setting, who speak that language, who have been there before, who have facts at their disposal. And so that's really shutting out most of the voices in our community. What we are actually about is not just getting the voices heard, but beginning to engage with policymakers in new and creative ways where we have equals at the table. Community members start to develop those skills to engage with policymakers, and truthfully, policymakers develop skills to engage with community members as equals, not just as somebody who provides input and then it goes into a black hole and then policy is made. So for example, one of the things we're doing is looking at bus stops. Are they close enough to our campus here that serves homeless residents? Currently it's very clear that they are not close enough. How can we make them become closer? Of course, these issues are not simple. You can't just decide, okay, we're going to put a bus stop a mile closer, or a quarter of a mile closer. There are issues of whose jurisdiction is that land and who owns the land abutting that land, and is there a speed zone there, and is there a crosswalk there? I mean, these are issues that cross multiple departments at the city and at the county, within the MPO, within the transportation department, within community development, facilities and roads. And so we're actually working to get those folks talking together. That often doesn't happen in our city. We see, a development or somebody put up a bike lane, and the other 3 departments in the city may not know that that's even happening. So it's communication that has to happen with community members as well as between departments at the city. And to be honest, I've been very encouraged that the city and the folks who work there are interested in seeing these changes. They're interested in having more communication and having more informed decisions, so that we don't have to do projects 2 or 3 times to get them right. We do them right the first time.
And is there anything that can be done outside of waiting for the city or the county to do something?
There sure is, and that's a fine line, especially when you're an organization like ours, an NGO, which we work carefully and closely with the city, but we also want to keep pushing. We don't necessarily want to just say, okay, whatever you say is all right, and we'll work within those confines. So one of the projects that we are going to be starting in a couple of weeks is actually developing an intersection mural, and that will be basically something we do on our own, because at the moment there are no policies, as there are in Portland and other cities, for actually creating, artistic crosswalks or intersection murals that calm traffic and provide a sense of place. We want to actually put one in, and then show the city, hey, the neighborhood really likes this. We're working with neighborhoods, we're working with organizations that live in the neighborhood. They're all for it, and we're going to be working with them to paint it. But right now, the city doesn't really know how that might work. So we're going to be pushing them a little in that direction. And that's kind of exciting.
And here in the desert Southwest, you get some hot temperatures in the summer, maybe hotter in the future, depending on which way the climate's going. How does that complicate life for people trying to live here?
Oh, incredibly, and in ways that most people don't even realize yet. For one thing, we don't have a lot of shaded areas to walk. Even if you have a sidewalk that's safe, it may not be shaded. And so we're looking at developing more shaded corridors. And the infill district, which is right in the center of our city, is very highly covered in concrete and asphalt. And so the temperatures there are much higher, by several degrees actually, than outskirts of the city, which are more affluent and suburban. So that's something that's really important to us. How can members of those communities who tend to have fewer economic resources, many of them are elderly, what's going to happen with them in extreme heat events? Do they have access to cooling centers? Can they get to those cooling centers? Is there water available for folks who are homeless? This is one of our big issues in the summertime, are the parks open for people to use the restroom and to get drinking water? Many times they're not, and so that's something that we're working with the city on to try to figure out. We need common sense policies that are going to enable people to be healthy and have access to services that they have a right to have without our parks and other amenities being destroyed. There has to be sort of a two-way street here. So, for example, one of the things we're looking at with the bus stops, if we are able to locate them closer to our campus of Hope, can we work with our homeless colleagues to actually adopt those bus stops and make sure that they don't become sites for arson, for vandalism, those types of things. And that way we can ensure that they're actually located in places where they should be, rather than just in a vacant lot as far away from as possible from other services.
Visit us on the internet at www.pedestrians.org.